Hello, everybody. Welcome back to a new political compass test or political axes test, whatever. It's a political test. It's called 9 Axes. This is a new one I just recently heard of. Um, so yeah, we're gonna get right into it. Okay, you will be presented with a series of statements. For each one, click the button with your opinion on it. Ooh. Give me the. You know what? Let's go all in. Give me the full one. Let's do it. It is important that the government follows the majority opinion, even if it is wrong. Then I would say. Uh, I would disagree with that, I disagree because, I think they definitely should have to answer for, why they did that. They shouldn't do that necessarily without consequences necessarily. But most definitely, if said thing is restricting the freedoms of Americans. Yeah, nice cup. All right. Yeah, I support regional unions such as the European Union. Yes, I do. I do think they can be pretty darn bad, but generally I am in support of such unions. Basic things needed to live, such as healthcare, are rights. I would highly agree with that. I support single-payer universal healthcare. Yes, I do. Some freedom must be given up in order to keep people safe. Very minimally, I would say. Okay. Nobody but me can adequately represent my views. I disagree. I think I represent my views fully because, of course, my views can slightly adapt and change, and the other person can't get all the nuances completely right, but could someone have a generalized view of my views, have sort of a general good understanding? Absolutely, and I would consider that adequate. A very nuanced description of my views would be more helpful, but I wouldn't think it be super necessary unless we're getting into a super in the weeds discussion. But yeah, but especially for let's say representatives. So they're not going to they're gonna represent my views fairly accurately. And of course, they've probably got other people they're representing, and so it's and they probably have their own views. So it's going to be. It can definitely be difficult, but I do think they can do a fairly adequate job of representing my views. The elders in society know the best path for it. Disagree. Yeah, the elders in society, and um, they definitely can be good on some overall principles, but as to the direct path forward, they probably don't know. They elders are good at, pointing you in the right direction, or telling you the goal, where the goal should be, and instilling some basic knowledge on you, and preparing you for the world. But ultimately, the best people suited to, you know, drive ahead into the drive ahead into the path before you is, the younger generation, because they're the people who are, involved and experience the here and now on a day-to-day basis. They're more in tune with how, society currently functions, whereas older people tend to be retired and they don't really uh, engage in day-to-day society, at least very little compared to the younger folk. So yeah, that's what I would say. Traditions are of no value on their own. Um, I guess to some extent I agree. I do think some traditions can have value now, but of course, without people to practice them, they are of no value. But some traditions are fairly good, and I do think tradition to a decent extent is perfectly fine, uh, as long as they, you know, don't really do anything. They don't restrict people's freedom. They don't advocate for the restriction of people's freedom. They don't do anything really adversely negative. They're mostly just harmless. Now, of course, nothing is completely harmless, um, especially traditions, especially religious traditions, because, well, a certain religious tradition might not be altogether egregious. Um, I do think to some extent it could be enabling some uh, egregious beliefs of people who, take things pretty far. So, and giving, sort of some of these old traditions a bit of credence, especially when there's a reasonable degree of problematic behavior that can be divined from many of these religious traditions. Like, many of the holy books are filled with hideous immoralities, and like they are very homophobic and misogynistic. And so, even though a number of specific traditions could be completely fine and nothing, to some extent it does, in a larger sense, by practicing them, you are giving this sort of religion institution a bit more credence to it. Um, and so that's why I can see some problems with certain traditions. But yeah, marijuana should be legalized. Hell yes. Laws should vary from area to area and culture to culture within a country. Um, I somewhat agree. Culture to culture, I disagree. Now, I guess you might find some specific instances of laws that I probably would agree with, but generally speaking, I think the laws of any place, especially with regards to criminal law, which is what we typically think of, um, should basically be the same for everybody, not just based on where you live, but for everybody, um, even across cultures, so that our liberties are protected and the thwartation of liberties are is criminalized, etc. So yeah. Now, hmm, to a great extent, that is what I would be very interested in doing. Abortion should be legal in all cases. I'm generally leaning more and more in favor of abortion, uh, considering we've got a population crisis. So yeah, pretty in favor of that. And we need to be dealing with this population crisis in a voluntary way. Um, I'm talking not necessarily the United States, but in the world in general. We've got billions of people and counting. So yeah, we need to be sort of reducing our population, and by reducing our population, we are reducing our overall carbon footprint or greenhouse gas footprint. Now, unlike China, which has taken a very authoritarian approach to this, I think we should generally be doing population control on a much more voluntary basis. So, uh, I don't think suicide should be as frowned upon. Definitely still frowned upon, but you know, have a bit more acceptance surrounding it, especially for the older folk, because you know, once they've lived their life and then they're confined to a sick bed, at some point, I think they should just be like, be able to determine, uh, when they're gonna die instead of wallowing in agony for the last few months of their life. Uh, Government surveillance is necessary in the modern world. Um, I do think surveillance is necessary in the modern world. Not necessarily government surveillance. So yeah, I'm going to disagree. I think surveillance should be a necessity so you can, keep an eye out for people to protect your property, but government surveillance, I'm more against increasing government surveillance capabilities, and I think they should actually be reduced. Sex outside marriage is immoral. Hell the fuck no. To chase progress at all costs is dangerous. Yes, though progress is necessary. because otherwise you're stuck in the past, like France in World War II. I mean, yeah, they were. I mean, oversimplified. Did a great job of fully explaining the situation the French were in. I mean, they were completely stuck in how great they did in the First World War, which made them completely uh, lackluster in World War II. Popular opinion is not always right. Uh, agree. Though there are a number of instances where they tend to be pretty good. But yeah, they're not always right. There is no need for local or state governments. Strongly disagree. We should be more accepting to other cultures. Strongly agree. Now, actually, no previous. I think just agree because we do need to be accepting of other cultures. There's certain practices that I think we should be not so accepting of, and yeah, so we, you know, be accepting, but within reason. We should be taking in more refugees. Definitely, I'm full for taking in more refugees. A nation's culture is important to protect. Uh, Depends on the culture of the nation. Because if you have a very free, open, welcoming society that is strong in individual liberty and freedom, and that sort of national culture, then I think yeah, it is important to protect. But if you've got like a more of a homogenous, uh, racist culture intent on protecting your pure homogenous identity in your culture, sort of like a shooting off major Hitler vibes, then absolutely not. So that's one of the questions I don't really like. It's because this is just a general statement instead of like because questions like this need a lot more context because it depends on what type of nation's culture is important to protect. Uh, so I'll go with agree. Democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others we've tried. Disagree. I'm guessing that's like. I think that's saying democracy's the worst, but all the other governments we've tried were worse than democracy. Yeah, I'm gonna disagree. But not strongly because I'm not sure I completely understood that question. But I don't think it's the worst. No, I don't think it's completely good, but it's not the worst. And generally speaking, I'm sure there's other forms that we've tried that have been tried that are, or that haven't been tried, that are insanely worse than democracy. So, and of course, I don't think democracy needs to be gotten rid of. I think it needs to just be tweaked. Because democracy it's not perfect, but in terms of how it handles things in a way that gives pretty much everyone a say, or at least that's the idea. We fall flat of that a number of times, but that I think is one of the best systems, at least that we've currently been able to do. Now, of course, there's a lot of disagreement and a lot of bickering and arguing that happens, which makes you wish you could just do whatever you wanted and not have to go through the democratic process, but that tends to lead to some very bad outcomes. So generally, we should go through the democratic process. I think it's pretty good. International trade is generally beneficial. Yes, though it can be bad. There should be no police force. Disagree. The freer the market, the freer the people. Yeah, I do think you need to have a genuine free market, which requires regulation to stop a free market, the free market from turning into a captive market, just like the healthcare industry, and a number of other instances that can crop up. People should have equal opportunity to succeed. Hell yes. Excessive government intervention is a threat to the economy. I'll agree, though we've not had too much of that a lot of times. Sometimes we have too little government intervention. Now, Europe, I know they've got 10,000 times more regulations. I don't know whether they meet that standard in Europe, but at least in the United States, I don't think we've got too much intervention in the economy. Every religion must be looked upon equally by the government. Strongly agree. Equally stupid. No. No, just treated like any normal, but to me, they're equally stupid. The general populace makes poor decisions. Meaning the elites make great decisions? I disagree with this sentiment. I just disagree because I think being a human being makes you prone to make stupid fucking decisions, just in general. Now, the general populace does make poor decisions, but not as a collective, usually. They typically, especially when in politics, they're typically formed on making a better society. Now, sometimes things can get crazy, but especially here in the US, our populace tends to be pretty good at reforming our government when they have, at least direct democracy opportunities to affect reforms in this country. Our elites tend to not do that. The people in power tend to not do that. Though when they do, that's always a good thing. But yeah, people should vote issue by issue themselves. Um, on this one, I would say I'm neutral. I think we need, you know what? I'll go back. They should. I'll agree to that. Um, because people tend to do a better job. You have a better job of democracy when it's more of a direct democracy. Um, you have people focusing more on what we should be striving towards, whereas politicians and bureaucrats, they tend to jerk themselves off, and tell the general populace kind of screw off. Now, so, and the main problem, at least here in the US, is the fact that we have this sort of representative democracy because generally, there are some exceptions, but generally, whenever we've had direct democracy options and reforms have been on the ballot, even though a huge right winger just got elected, the same people that elected the right winger voted for a left wing ballot proposal, something the right winger would have never have implemented unless it was a direct issue voted upon by the public. So that is a major instance. And so I do think we need a bit more of a balance between the two. And that a number of reforms should be implemented by the people themselves, not the Congress. Because Congress isn't going to reform Congress. We're going to need people to reform Congress. And so I do think we should have national ballot measures that require a 60% maybe even a 67% threshold to vote percentage threshold, so it's basically as though the people were Congress themselves. A group of states without a strong national government is merely an alliance, not a nation. This is a big one. I'm not sure. I guess a decent argument could be made. But I would disagree. I think if they consider themselves a nation, then they are a nation. Those who do not work should die. No. But if they want to, they should be able to. It is better to maintain a balanced budget than to ensure the welfare for all citizens. Strongly disagree. I do think you should maintain a balanced budget, but not at the cost of the well-being of the citizens. There are many issues that it does not make sense to address at a local level. I'm going to say disagree because I'm more prone to local politics because we have more say in that. Technology is not always beneficial. Strongly agree. Equality of outcome is important. I'm gonna say not necessarily. To some degree, it's some degree important, but equality of opportunity is the most important because equality of outcome is nearly impossible to get. You can try and get close. You can't, but you can't get super close, but you can get as close as physically possible. But it's a fool's errand to try to go for equality of outcome. You can try it in some maybe specific sections of the economy and society, but to go for it all over, I think is a fool's errand and shouldn't be even thought of as a serious option. Like having equality of opportunity to go to the doctor and better outcomes for individual people, if you consider that being to some extent equality of outcome or bettering equality of outcome, then sure, yeah, that's good, but it's largely a fool's errand. Military spending is a waste of money. Disagree, though, at the level the US is spending on the military, it kind of is. International aid is a waste of money. It depends on how much you're spending. Immigrants are a net positive. Absolutely. Especially if one nation in particular is having a declining population, which is good. So you have immigrants. And then the overall population over time decreases, which means we need to get a lot more Indians here. Because Indians are in India are multiplying at an unstoppable rate. Practically unstoppable. We need Indians in countries with a declining population so that they don't just, freaking multiply out of control. We need a lot smaller population that is a lot easier to manage, because we're approaching quick and fast the Earth's maximum carrying capacity. Not to mention the disasters of climate change that is multiplied by the amount of people. Technological progress is usually good. I'll agree to that because it's usually good, meaning it has some good qualities to it. There's a number of bad qualities too, but good. Not great, not fantastic, just good. That's cool. Police need more power and protection. At least here in the US, no. Local governments address issues that the national government would never touch without them. Strongly agree. Government-owned industry is usually a bad idea. Not necessarily. Government-owned industry, it should, when competing alongside private industry, can be a very good thing for society. We should put effort into getting a person on Mars in the near future. I disagree. I mean, if we do, I guess cool, but I don't think it's where our priority should be. My nation should stay out of international affairs. Hell no. There should not be international law. No, I think we definitely should be striving to. Now, what the international law is a subject for adequate debate, but the fact that should we not have no international law at all, I disagree. Local governments give region. Now, let me just double check, make sure we're still recording. Yep, we are still recording. Okay, good. Local governments give each region good representation of their views. You know, I guess I'm going to be a bit more neutral on that because I'm not super well into local politics here in Dallas. Now, I do know that you have your vote, you have more of a say percentage wise compared to your entire country, so in theory you have more of a voice, but if you're not as engaged in your city politics and you're more focused on national politics, then you don't really have that much of a say. And your politicians might not adequately reflect you. So I'm pretty neutral on that. Democracy makes it too easy for a majority to further itself at the expense of minorities. I generally disagree. It depends on the type of democracy you have. Because, of course, and sometimes, depending on the type of republic you've got, which is the general, I guess, shorthand they're using for democracy when they really mean Republican style with representatives, oftentimes it can be good for a minority, like the wealthy or wealthy interests and stuff. It can be much more better for a minority, a powerful minority, than the majority. So that's always a thing to consider. People should be given freedom whenever it causes little security risk. Absolutely. I would even say to give people a decent amount of freedom even when there's a greater risk. So the idea that we should not give people freedom when there is little security risk is absolutely absurd. From each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Voluntarily and through a decent taxing system, though definitely not too overbearing for uh, wealthy individuals. Definitely, like here in the U.S., taxes definitely should be raised. Though I would not be saying to, though I wouldn't want to raise them uh, too much. I'd want to raise them to a fairly significant amount, but not like so, where it's, complete communism. So I'm gonna, disagree a bit, but not completely. War is needed to make an economy thrive. No, it can do that, but it's not required. The government should have access to the emails of suspected terrorists. Now, this is a tricky worded question. I do think they should be allowed to be given access, but to just have access to emails of suspected terrorists at word go, like, hey, we need, these are some people, some suspected terrorists. Oh, yeah, just pull up their email. Like, no, it should be a process where you go, hey, can we get can we gain access to these people's emails? We think they're terrorists. All right, show me what you've got. Show me what you've got. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. You can. Yep. You can go ahead. You can use the go ahead and scrounge through their emails. That's how it really should go. So I guess agree. Like we shouldn't deny them access to them, but it can't just be, yeah, we've got everyone's emails, and oh yeah, okay, these people, okay, yeah, good, we've got their entire communication list. Yeah, no, fuck that. Military action by our nation is often necessary to protect it. Strongly disagree. I live in the U.S. We don't do it to a lot of our military to protect us. Some of our actions have been to protect our country, but in modern years, it hasn't been very much of that. I support gay marriage. Abso-freaking-lutely. A nation must obey its leadership without question. Hell no. Religion should be removed from everything in our government. Hell yes. A government must maintain a strong military to defend itself. Unnecessarily strong nations, sure, but don't give it overbearing amounts of money. It is important to maintain our national sovereignty. Um, mm, to some extent, yes, but not completely. I do think local governments can understand their citizens better than the national government could. Um, I would definitely strongly agree. They definitely understand. Question is, do they actually do what's better for their citizens? That's not always the case. It depends on, are those citizens engaged in their local politics? If they're not, then the politicians might not be looking out for the best interest. But local politicians are more likely to have an understanding of their citizenry. It's just a question of whether they follow through on the behalf for the citizens and what is best for the citizens. While, the national government is going to be more out of touch with like the local citizens of some random town. Victimless crimes such as drug use should not be crimes at all. Hell yes. Alliances are important for protecting a nation. Um, Definitely, I'm all for diplomacy and deterrence. Any alliance that could help protect people and deter war, um, that's great. A religion usually provides the truth. No, the United Nations should be abolished. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. Genetic modification should be rarely used, if ever. I'm gonna go with agree, because I know it could have the potential to make some profound improvements to society, but with those with great rewards comes great risk, and so instead of profound improvements, it could be profound negatives. So yeah, be careful with that gene modification stuff. Um, if we accept migrants at all, it is important that they assimilate into our culture. Now, of course, this is again, context requires a bit more context to be a bit more accurate, because depending on the type of culture you're in, like here in the U.S., we have much more of a multicultural culture. With now, there is an overall American, more of an American culture that you could say exists, which is a very vague sort of deal. It's very consumeristic and stuff. Um, but then there's but mixed in to American culture is all these various cultures, like, hey, we got Italian pizza, Yamaji, and we've got so many different cultures here that surround this sort of American culture, and so and of course we have and this head's kind of getting itchy, so I'm just going to take it off. But we've got an American culture that has elements from all these different places all over the world, and so assimilating into American culture is more or less accepting sort of American principles such as freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and taking criticism of religion and not being and rejecting fundamentalist wackos, even though Christian fundamentalist wackos are a strong part of American culture. But I think a great part of American culture is like telling those guys off. I don't want to curse any more than I have in this video, so I'm gonna try and keep it at a minimum. So if we accept migrants and all, I would say if you have a culture much like that, then it definitely should be accepted that you assimilate into the culture, because that creates a much better say society overall. Whereas if they don't assimilate, they're sort of removed from the society at large, and they become sort of this big other deal, which tends to breed some animosity, and we've had plenty of that in this country, and we don't need any more of that, animosity between different cultures. We need much more cohesion, and so sort of assimilation. And of course, we can do a lot better by easing some burdens and racial tensions through whatever means we can find, legislatively, socially, or whatever. But yeah, so that's definitely something that shouldn't be purely borne out by the migrants alone. So I would agree, but of course, not all countries are like that, so it depends on the country. Genetic modification is a force for good even on humans. I disagree. It's not necessarily a force for evil, but it's just a neutral force that can be used for both good and evil, which is largely subjective, depending on who you are. You might think what you might think is oh, this would be great. I might think that is terrible. So yeah, I mean, it's very neutral. Genetic modification is very neutral and could be used to do horrific things or great things. And those great things might come with bad side effects, or bad things could even cause some good side effects. Um, so yeah, it's all mixed bags. Human-caused climate change is currently one of the greatest threats to our way of life. Uh, Strongly agree. It's the second greatest threat to our current way of life. The first greatest threat is nuclear annihilation and the rising global tensions that if we don't break out, that likely break out into World War III, which could be disastrously nuclear, which will kill us quicker than climate change. Because I would say climate change, we should definitely be preparing for climate change and doing everything in our power to avoid it. And we need to be doing it as quick as possible. And we also need to be equally as concerned with diplomacy because that has arguably a more imminent, a short-term effect on our survival as a species, because all it just takes is and we're all dead, you know? Or not necessarily just a button, but just it just takes a phone call. Fire the nukes. And we're dead. Yeah, so illegal immigrants should be deported in most or all cases. Not necessarily. In a number of cases, I would say yes, but it depends on the specific scenario, which would mean if they are a strong worker, they've been contributing for years, they've grown roots in this community, they have virtually none in their home country, which would largely be Mexico here, then I don't think it should be a problem to deport. I mean, I would think it would be a problem to deport them. I think they should be allowed to stay. Now, of course, it depends on the specific individual, because now I wouldn't necessarily deport all criminals. If they've previously served and if they've served in the U.S. military, then I don't think they should be deported, because I would consider them just like, a normal American criminal that just happens to not be a citizen as of yet. Now, if they commit a fairly serious crime, then they should be deported to their home country. And they should especially be deported if they are here illegally because they are fleeing justice from a serious crime they committed back home. So yeah, there is no higher power. Higher power, I would say I'm neutral. I can't say for sure there is yes or no, I disagree. Children should be educated in religious values. Strongly disagree. Religious values are are regressive and repressive. Now, we should definitely not teach them to be completely hedonistic, because that has some negatives in and of its own. But but teach children to be responsible, and also that they can indulge in certain, and as long as you're not hurting other people, what you indulge in, so long as you're being responsible and not being problematic to your own health and your own life, um, that is completely fine. Um, Nations should not maintain a military. Um, I would not now in a utopian society. I would say, yeah, we should maintain a military because um, in this scenario, it's saying like no nation should maintain a military. Then yeah, I would completely agree with that. We shouldn't have militaries, but yeah. So I guess if it's since it's saying generally our nation shouldn't, but it's more saying that no nation should, because of course if other nations have a military, you kind of have to have a military. But if it so in that sense, I'm gonna go with yeah. If we just abolish world military, if the world abolishes militarism, then yeah, unless we find an alien species is coming, then we should quickly build up we should have a military. But as long as there's but as long as or we are the only threat to ourselves, then yeah, we shouldn't have a military then. Uh, Only extremely talented immigrants, if that, should be permitted to enter the country. I disagree. I think you generally might want more of them than of the poor immigrants, but we should still let the poorer immigrants in. Now, the amount of immigrants we let in is generally, I would say, debatable, but we definitely should be letting a lot of immigrants in, uh, especially as our population declines, you know, etc. And economies without any capitalism will collapse. I have to agree with that. Uh, all societies are a blend of cultures. I would strongly agree to that. Now, it's not because, because societies have formed over time with the mixing of ancient civilizations that are no longer here, and cultures mix and mingle, and stories shared, and so over time things get very fixed, and we've sort of identified characteristics of cultures, but even then there's mixes of different cultures from different areas and stuff. So yeah, they're pretty much blends of cultures. Automation is overall extremely good for society. I would say neutral, because it can be good for society if we adapt to it to mean like, hey, instead, if that means, okay, we're going to more of an automation automation oriented society, um, people we're not going to have to work. We can, you know, start to focus more on our own lives, our own selves, and we can start up our own companies, and you can work and help if you want. You're not required to. You should have a decent wage from major industries, but that fund it. But and the economic laws should be allow um, other people to you know be doing stuff course, so we have, you know, they can, but of course, if we don't adapt, we'll have rich overlords ruling us all because no one will have a job. And no job, no money. Laws should not be based on religion. Absolutely agree. Having independent nations with the risk of global conflict creates a large threat to humanity. As a whole, strongly agree. Hold on. I would just say agree, because I think it's largely a fact. The conflict between us is a threat to us all. Now, whether that means we have to have a world government or we still have our international affairs, I mean, even if we all united under one nation, the nation of the world, um, there would still be that threat because things could unravel in that nation. But instead of just a normal war between warring nations, it would just be a civil war at that point. So yeah, I mean, it's not like that's just if as long as we have a world government, that's just gonna uh, solve everything. No, we're we're always we're always gonna be at each other's throats at some point or another. So just having one government isn't gonna stop that. People should have the power to choose their leaders. Absolutely agree. Religion must decline for society to progress. Strongly agree. Countries that do not serve our interests should be toppled. Disagree. Um, if they're doing more than that and they're actually a genuine imminent threat and they're also terrible for society, then yeah, I could see a reason to topple them. But I mean, war is never justified. Strongly disagree. There are times where it is justified, but it's the times that the U.S. sees fit to justify it, it's not nearly justified. Uh, the the poor choose to be poor. Strongly disagree. Some of them do, but it is a small fraction of people that choose to be poor. Strong states weaken a nation. Strongly disagree. Strong states strengthen the nation. Texas is a strong state. California is a strong state. Without us, the rest of the U.S. would be even more in poverty. Because the state of Texas sends money to the U.S. government, and we get less money than we send in. A lot of that money goes to the poorer states so that they have more money to tinker around with. So you think like Mississippi, Kentucky, Alabama, there are weaker links. But because we have strong states like Texas, California, arguably New York, I don't know how strong New York is, but with those states, them being strong increases the strength of the whole country, and because we have more of a redistribution network where the strong states give resources to the less strong states, we sort of by default increase the strength of the union. So yeah, they're not a threat. They can now, in some instances, they probably could become threats to a union, but in other cases, they just strengthen it. As subdivisions should not be able to exempt from national laws. Disagree. Theocracy is a good system of government. Strongly disagree. Illegal immigrants do not provide a benefit to the hosting country. Strongly disagree. This country has a bunch of them and they provide so much benefit. Our economy would be devastated if we deported every single illegal immigrant in this country. I mean, devastated. We probably could recover. We probably would be able to. But in the short term, devastated. Absolutely devastated. The government should not break up monopolies. Strongly disagree. Traditional medicines are often more effective than modern medicines. Disagree. Democracy is much more than a decision-making process. I would say sure. Religion does not belong in government. Strongly agree. The government should not fund any religious organization in any way. In any way, I disagree because I think if children go to... I'm torn because a lot of children go to religious schools, poor children, and so I do think the government, I'm more open to government funding their meals, like their lunch. If the meals for children that go to religious schools, if they can't afford it. So whether that's technically funding to a religious institution, I would see it more as funding religious citizens, poor religious citizens. So I'd disagree slightly, but generally agree. Or maybe just go agree, but not completely. Elections are an effective way of showing government approval. Disagree, because an election, if it's not a completely free and fair election and it's not structured in the right way, then it could just be voting for the lesser of two evils, even though you hate who you're voting for, So the more people asked, the better chance there is of reaching the best decision. Strongly agree. It is a good idea to test a policy in one state rather than implementing it nationwide right away. I see some benefits to it. It is necessary for the government to intervene in the economy to protect consumers. Absolutely agree. Yeah. The government must be by the people for the people. Absolutely. Technology is negatively affecting modern society. Not necessarily, but there are some instances, I would say. People should hold more loyalty to their local state than their country. Generally agree. Yeah. No authority should be left unquestioned. Absolutely. The benefits of open borders would outweigh the costs. Depends on the circumstances. Because right now, I don't think that's the case. I think the costs would be enormous. And the benefits would be few and far between. Because if it was, reasonable open borders policy, like it wasn't between too many nations, and there wasn't a huge influx of people. It was more of a general regular flow that might create a little strain on our system, but not too much. And we were getting a lot of economic, and they were really contributing to our society. Um, then I would think that policy would be overall more beneficial than costly. But just a plain open borders, I think that would be more costly than beneficial. The benefits, the economic benefits we might reap would probably be little in comparison. Instead, we might just have more unemployed, because if so many people come over, we might have so I'm not so now of course it'd have to be tested in a small scale before we expand it, but yeah, it is very important to maintain law and order. I generally agree to some extent. State and local laws should have precedence over national laws. I'm neutral because I think it should be a healthy balance, and certain state laws should have precedence over national laws. Certain national laws should have precedence over state laws, specifically around protection of rights, and ensure. If a state is abridging some of the rights of its citizens, national law should take precedence. Uh, and if a state legalizes something that the nation considers should be illegal, then the state government should take precedence. The sacrifice of some civil liberties is necessary to protect us from acts of terrorism. Um, Disagree. No more than we would normally give up for normal crimes, not just terrorism. States cannot function without a strong national government. Disagree. Not as well, not maybe necessarily as well, but they still definitely can function. If you have nothing to hide, then you shouldn't care about the government having. Disagree. We should respect those who have served in our military. I think we should respect people on an individual basis. All humans share a common identity. In that we're human, sure, I would agree to that. The national government can't understand what the people need. Disagree. They can. It's a question. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. It's not a function of they're incapable of doing that. It's just sometimes they don't have the right people. It's only sometimes that they can't understand it. Traditions are important. Disagree. Depends on the tradition. My religious values should be spread as much as possible. I don't really have religious values, but I guess so technically I would say disagree. The internet should be banned. No. Elections are a waste of resources. Hell no. In the modern era, militaries aren't really necessary. Disagree. They shouldn't be necessary, but they are. Each person should have one vote, each equal to every other. generally agree, though I do think in certain circumstances we should have more of a, regional, um, more of a regional sort of system to sort of balance, the interests of certain regions instead of just like some major dense areas. Uh, just give them a bit, like, to help, so because like there is a decent problem of like a rural urban divide that's pretty darn real. So yeah, I do think there needs to be a bit some balance in some traditional uh one person one vote, because that can tend to favor urban settings more than rural. um Maintaining family values is essential. Disagree. A national government must be strong to adequately protect all its citizens. Strongly agree. Strong enough, not overly strong. Anybody who wants to enter the country should be able to. Generally, but conditions apply. A country cannot function without a national government. It can function, maybe not as well, but it still can function. Communism, if implemented correctly, would be a good form of economics. I'm not sure I would agree with that. So yeah, I think, yeah, disagree. The government should not regulate the economy at all. Hell no. Capitalism is better than any existing alternative. Disagree. Those who disagree with the government should be removed from the country. Hell no. In general, immigrants are bad for the country. Hell no. Any deals. Oh shit. Good I taped them so that doesn't make me have to reset it. Any deals other countries want must be bad for us. Strongly. No, not necessarily. They can be, but they're not necessarily. I believe in a higher power. Strongly disagree. We should not allow any refugees. Strongly disagree. Nations should cooperate whenever it benefits them both. Strongly agree. State laws should have precedence over national laws. Generally speaking, not completely. Countries that violate human rights should be toppled. I would say I would hope they would be toppled, but the process of actually going and doing that might be worse in the long run. So you got to be careful how you do it. We must go back to a very basic way of life without modern conveniences. Strongly disagree. We might, depending on how climate change goes, we might eventually be forced to, but I don't think we have to now. Testing products on animals is ethical. I would say it's generally as ethical as testing them on humans. So, yeah. If we were going to test it on humans, I think, yeah. Um, and I definitely do think we should be increasing human testing of such and reducing animal testing because animals tend to have a reducing population. We've got so many gosh darn people. I mean, of course, if someone were to volunteer for a testing facility, they know all the risks involved, and they're willing to do it, probably in exchange for a decent chunk of change, then why the fuck not? uh, so, I'm gonna say, depending, I'm gonna say it can be, but not necessarily. Um, Even when protesting an authoritarian government, violence is unacceptable. Disagree. I mean, it depends on the government, how authoritarian the government is. But I do think, to some extent, violence can be acceptable, but not necessarily. Most drugs should be legalized. Strongly agree. Absolute freedom makes a society dangerous. Generally agree because I would say absolute freedom includes freedom to murder, freedom to steal, freedom basically just devoid of common sense laws. Meaning like murder, theft, rape, what is it? Uh, Slavery. Yeah, so basically a society where everything goes. So there needs to be some restrictions, basic restrictions, but generally very free with minimal restrictions on at least personal restrictions, economic restrictions so that everyone isn't getting screwed, so we have a fair system. There's going to be more government involvement there as is necessary. War usually leads to worse outcomes. I agree. Actually, before usually, so I'm going to strongly agree. In some cases, it could lead to better outcomes, but it depends on where the war was fought and who the better outcomes are for, because war can produce better outcomes for a number of people, but it's bad for a good number of people, and it's also can be better for a good number of people. So it depends on if it was specifically good or bad for you. Leader, and let me just quickly double check, make sure I'm still recording. Yes, I am. All right. Leaders must be strong or a nation will suffer. I generally agree, but it depends on what type of strength they are. I am proud to be in my country. Strongly, yes. It is more important to retain peaceful relations than to further our strength. Yes. Strongly agree. Religion is beneficial for society. Disagree. In some isolated incident, it could marginally be better for society, but overall, I think it's generally bad. Governments should be accountable to the international community. Agree, though I have some hesitations to it. Um, Generally, because you've got some bad actors in the international community. So you want to be careful, on how much accountability you have depending on who's in control, but generally I do think more being accountable is to some degree a good thing. We are first and foremost citizens of the earth. Strongly agree. A military option should always be considered. Agree, though it should be considered as the last option. It should be not necessarily not taken off the table, but you know, not considered as the immediate option. You should go, okay, if someone immediately is considering military, you're like, no, not yet. Let's do our other options. That should be the general mentality. Yeah. Immigrants should be expected to learn the language of the country. Generally, I would say kind of yes. Not just purely. I mean, if their daily life does not necessitate it, like if they're living in a certain area of the country that where they it's not required, where their daily life does not require them to know a certain language, then sure, they don't have to learn English. But in a place where, English is kind of, required for day-to-day life, then I do think you should be expected to learn it so you can be successful in your day-to-day life. And and jobs that now you might not be if you don't have too good of English, but you have decent enough English to do your specific job, and a lot of people in the job speak your language, then I don't see any problem with you working there. Now, so again, it depends on your proficiency and what you're going to be doing, but it should be generally expected that you should learn the language to which you're moving to, or not necessarily the specific language. Like, say if I was moving to Sweden, like it should be something. It should be generally expected that I should learn Swedish. Now, should it be should it be generally required that I learn Swedish? Not necessarily, because for me specifically, I've learned Swedish, but I shouldn't have to learn Swedish because so many people there speak English. It's practically the second de facto language. So I would say if everyone there speaks two languages, so like in Sweden, if you're going to move to Sweden and pretty much everyone there speaks Swedish and English, then I would say it should be expected that you learn one of the two. You don't have to learn the regional language that originated there, but you could learn the sort of language that everyone who lives there has to pretty much learn since they're a kid as well, which is English. So again, everyone should be expected to learn any language that would be necessary for day-to-day functionality. They don't, and if there's multiple languages that can do that, like in a number of these multilinguistic countries that have high proficiencies in two languages, most likely the regional language and then English, then those two languages should be to some extent expected for you to learn. So that would be my sort of thing on that. Only our national languages should be spoken in our country. Strongly disagree. No, no, no. I fully think you should be expected to learn like a language for you to at least get by in a day to day in a different country. But if you meet up with your buddy who's from your home country, I think perfectly fine. You should be able to, whenever able to, you should fully be able to speak your home language. And but generally, yeah, we have no right to militarily intervene in other nations. Um, Now this is a little bit tricky because it like, do we have some inherent right to do this? No, but we have rights over our military and we have rights over what we do with it. So in that sense, like, we can do with our military generally whatever we want. Now, of course, we have to deal with the consequences, but it's our military. We can do what we want. Um, Now, it's a question of should we? I would argue no, but to some extent, we technically have the ability, and I don't think anyone can tell us what we have to do with our military. Um, now, um, now it depends on how you interpret this. I would generally think. I would generally disagree with this because I think anyone has a right to, as long as if they can do it. Well, actually, now that I think about it, I'm gonna agree. I generally agree, but I don't think we should. But I do think to some extent we do have, like, I don't, but yeah, I would generally agree with, that statement, but I'm thinking more on a practical terms, like we have a right to our military, we have a right to what we do with our military, so by that logic, anyone has a right to intervene in another country. But the sentiment it's getting, I do agree with that sentiment. People's freedom should have no limits. Disagree. I think those limits should be very small, except when it comes to economics. Then and when it comes to you owning a large corporation and you being the responsible for the well-being of many employees, and your customers, then the restrictions on your freedom get larger because you have to follow certain rules to ensure. You have to, I think, ensure you have to be considerate to your fellow citizens, and you shouldn't be screwing them over in any way, shape, or form. So in that sense, your liberties to screw them over would significantly diminish. But generally speaking, personally, should you have the right to do what you want in the privacy of your own home? Sure, absolutely. There should be compulsory military service. Disagree, but not. I think we shouldn't have to have it, but I do think in certain circumstances it can be necessary. Society was better many years ago than it is now. Neutral, I definitely would say it's sort of a shift, because society in some ways was better many years ago, but in other ways it was worse. So, it's like, what aspects of society are better, were better way back when. So, yeah, people must be allowed to follow a religion. Yeah, they can choose whatever religion they want. I think they're kind of stupid, but it's their right, you know. People should think of themselves as citizens of their nation rather than their state. Disagree. People born to wealthy families have unfair success even when they are not skilled. Yeah, I agree. National cultures are important to protect. Um, I would say to some extent, sure, I guess. You don't want it to go extinct. You want to keep certain cultural elements alive. You now, I don't think you have the right to impose it on everyone, but you should at least, I think, to some extent, be able to, stop it from dying out. Um, like do promotional activities, have it live on, give it, and eventually it is going to die out, but at least, promote it and like give it sort of a lasting, imprint on society, on the overall megaculture of society, so that, your culture did its part and you've got a prominent place. Oh, yeah, this part of our culture, we got that from those people, they're they're like woohoo! They enriched our culture, man. Woo! Our multicultural culture. Woo! Environmental regulations are essential. Of course they are, especially now. Nobody in other countries has our best interests in mind. Strongly disagree. Some of them might not have our best interests in mind, but the fact that nobody can have them, they can't. They might agree with us. So I enjoy some foreign cultures. Strongly agree. Sometimes the food, not so much, but because I am a very picky eater and I generally I don't, but I do enjoy some pretty interesting stuff of people's cultures. So, um, yeah, that's pretty cool. So yeah, countries fall apart with constant war. Um, they can. I think at some point any country will fall apart, but it depends on how you go about war. You don't not it doesn't necessitate that you're going to fall apart. Now, of course, um, if if things don't go well, and especially if there's constant war inside your country, it can fall apart. But if there's constant war that your country is involved in elsewhere, it doesn't it doesn't necessitate it falls apart. So I'm gonna say neutral because it doesn't necessitate, but falling apart, but it can. Uh, no cultures are superior to others. I mean, on an objective sense, I agree. There's no superior culture, but on a subjective sense, yeah, to some extent we have our preferences of which cultures we prefer to others, and like when we've engaged with other cultures and stuff. We're like, oh yeah, I really like that dance, so I really like this. And then you might think, oh, but I like this better. And you might think your own culture is, oh, I wish we had some cool stuff like that. Um, or you might like certain things better from other cultures, a little bit more than some from others. So subjectively and qualitatively, there's certain aspects of cultures, and you might determine that, oh, overall you like one culture better than another, maybe less, and definitely probably less than your own. But I would say so. I would disagree, especially also because some cultures have barbaric practices that I completely disagree with. Let me check what time it is. Oh yeah, it's 12. It's midnight. No biggie. Laws should be completely consistent within all regions of a nation. Uh, Not necessarily. To a decent extent, yes, and some very specific laws, absolutely. Though, I do think there is a decent amount of regional tinkering that should be allowed. Um, Catering to popular opinion is detrimental to a nation. Disagree, not necessarily all the time, but sometimes it can be detrimental, but not always. Uh, the very existence of the state is a threat to our liberty. Agree. It is a threat that we must live with. It is a potential threat. Um, our culture would be better with other cultures mixed in more. Absolutely, yeah. The national government protects minorities better than some local governments do. Um, I would definitely agree. I would definitely agree on that. Alliances can pose a threat to a nation's sovereignty. Trade agreements, some trade deals, I would say, can pose a threat to a nation's sovereignty. Alliances, I'm more inclined to disagree. Public utilities like roads and electricity should be publicly owned. Generally, yes, they don't have to be, but yeah, a nation usually needs a military in order to survive. I strongly agree, yes. Some semblance of a military for defense. Um, when people have already suffered for technology we should use that technology. Agree. Like if someone fought and suffered hard for technology to make this technology so that we could benefit from this technology, then it's like, yes, we will remember him and all of his glory for helping us with this technological advancement. Now, if it's some horrible technology that tortures people, then no, 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 no. But if it's like, but yeah, I believe there is something after death. Uh, yes, dirt. No. No, not an afterlife. No, strongly disagree. A hierarchical state is best. Dang. To some extent, yes. Especially for organizing a whole bunch of people, but you know, because there hasn't been a lot of success, at least long-term success, with these with some communes. Oppression by corporations is more of a concern than oppression by governments. I disagree. They can both be very oppressive. Um, a country must be sure to take all measures to enforce its laws. Strongly disagree. Some laws I would agree with, but like mostly infringing upon, but mostly it would be against the government. The law enforcement would need to basically, if Congress passed a law violating the Constitution and the freedoms of this country, I would expect law enforcement to go in and arrest Congress or arrest the president, and if necessary, kill the president or anyone who tries to, protect the president if they are breaking the laws. Now, if a president like shoplifts, for example, no, I don't think they should enforce that to everything. But if he, is trying to, destroy our freedoms and democracy, then, I would support that, So, presidents, behave. In order for humanity to survive, we must get past having separate nations. Disagree, because, now I would be interested in having a world government, and that's something once I kind of fully complete it, everything I'm working on, I'm definitely going to do a video on it. But I am interested in a world government, but I don't think the idea of abolishing nations is necessarily a bad thing. Now, abolishing a number of nations that currently exist today, sure, though I would only replace them with nation-like entities, which are basically, states, like, say, Texas, like, say, all the 50 states plus the 6 territories and 5 territories and 1 federal district, all would become potential constituent nations within this sort of world government, and all the smaller nations would contribute, and etc. So we'd still have nations, but it'd be like under a world federal government. So I don't think that's a bad thing, even if we were to go for a world government. So yeah, religious organizations often provide better assistance to the poor than the government does. I would say disagree, because now if the government, because now religious organizations are great at picking up areas where the government has decided when the government decides that they're not going to provide assistance to the poor, or they're only going to provide a limited assistance to the poor, then religious institutions that do provide assistance to the poor are great as more secondary assistance. But when the government provides assistance, it's usually always much better and more widespread and much more, it tends to be generally more effective than, say, an individual religious institution. So religious institutions are great for picking up the slack when government just doesn't want to do anything about any particular problem and a religious institution is willing to, but when government is willing to do it, it's often better. Or because like religious institutions, just like governments have corruption in them and embezzling, churches especially tend to do so because they are tax exempt. Um, and so religious institutions tend to actually create poor people because a number of religious institutions tend to be pretty aggressive with that donation plate when people don't necessarily have all the money in the world and they're asking for it, especially those who adopt seed faith sermons. People should not have protections that could hinder discovering their criminal activity. Strongly disagree, because now you might think, oh, well, but it's discovering their criminal activity. Yeah, but many, if not all, of those same methods could be used to frame someone who didn't commit criminal activity to frame them for actually committing them, even though they're innocent. And even then, a number of times I would significantly take a look at a lot of the U.S. code, because one, I think we should have more state criminal laws than federal ones, and just have states and just have federal officers bring charges in state courts. And if you're on federal property, then yeah, federal law would apply. But generally, I am more interested in giving states control now. And I know states have not been perfect when they've had control, and so that's why I'd be much more interested in reforming the states and state structures so that they can be more democratic and more accountable and just, so that we can decentralize power a lot more. My nation is closer to my views than most nations in the world. I would say I agree. Not strongly agree, but generally agree. Subdivisions of nations should have their own militaries. Strongly agree. Public opinion swings too much with emotional events to be useful for policy making. To some extent, I disagree. I generally disagree, but I do see some instances of agreement. Because often public opinion swings to change it. Now, of course, one instance, in cases of one terrible instance, I would generally agree with you. But if it's a constant problem that tends to happen, then I say, you know what, something needs to be done. And public outcries, like with the gun deals, I generally agree with conservatives about guns. But I do also agree with liberals that something does need to be done. A better world will come from automation, science, and technology. I disagree. A better world can come about from those things, but not necessarily. Nations fighting among each other gets in the way of progress. I'm assuming this is a question about war, because of fighting amongst each other, meaning just, how normal humans might fight, meaning just verbally, then no, I think that might help progress. Because we fight, we air differences, we try to understand each other better, and then we can work forward from that. Then it comes. But if it's just war, then I'll say that. So I'll assume because it's nations fighting, they're talking about war. So then I'll agree. Diplomacy hurts nations. Disagree. Strongly disagree. A united world government would be beneficial to mankind. Disagree. It could be beneficial to mankind, but not necessarily. Foreigners should never enter the country. Strongly disagree. Foreigners are welcome to come. Whether it's you're wanting to move here, you're wanting to just visit and tour the place to see what attractions and sights we have for you, and to spend money in our country, please go right ahead. Make our country more prosperous. Please do that. Make Texas better. The government should support and only recognize one religion. Are you stupid? No. Police should be regulated more. Hell yes. It is important that we maintain traditions of our past. Disagree. It's nice, it can be nice to maintain the traditions of our past, but is it important? Is it completely necessary? No, I don't think it's important. I think it's a nice symbolic thing to do, but it's not important. Religious clothing should be banned from public. No. You can wear whatever the fuck you want. Sorry, I've been doing good, but I shouldn't curse as much, I should limit my cursing. Only those who serve in the military should be allowed to have influence on who is in power. Strongly disagree. Only those who served in the military should be able to gain power in government. Strongly disagree. Religion should be banned. Strongly disagree. Maybe a little bit less. No, I don't think it should be banned. No, I think we should make it. Oh, I'm kidding. I strongly disagree on that one. Governments should be as concerned about foreign citizens as they are about those within their borders. Disagree. I don't think foreign citizens should be completely discounted. I do think our government should, whenever they're doing something with foreign policy, should consider take foreign citizens into account, but they primarily serve those within our borders, and that is their job. They shouldn't be heartless and should consider the feelings of and the citizens of other countries that would be affected by their decisions, but ultimately they shouldn't be given but we are there, they work for us, and so they should be concerned about us more than foreign citizens. Now, so yeah, have decent amount of sympathy for foreign citizens and make sure they're being treated well, or as well as possible, depending on if there's a war zone going on. But your top priority should be your own citizens. People should have to work for anything they get. They should have to work, but not for anything they get. I disagree. As long as they're positively contributing to society, I think they should be. I think they should be well provided for, because they contribute to this society's growth. It is important that we further my group's goals above all others. I disagree with the overall sentiment, but I agree with it because I think, my goals are basically make sure everyone has their rights. We can pretty much do whatever the fuck we want so long as we are respectful to each other. We conduct our business ethically. We don't, screw people over. We don't do terrible things to each other. So yeah, I would say we should further those goals. But the overall sentiment I'm getting is that, we're the we're the Democratic group. We're one political group. You should favor us, give us a bunch of attention, give us a bunch of resources, but don't do anything for anyone else. Because that's one way it could be read. So I'm gonna say disagree, because I think we shouldn't just be considered. There must be a separation between church and state. Strongly agree. Representatives rarely represent the nation well. In my country, there's a strong argument to agree. I might say agree. They tend to be pretty hawkish and warmongers. People should have the right to leave their wealth to their descendants. Agree. Though I do think it shouldn't be, without limit, local governments should have more power than they currently do. I agree. The United Nations should have a military to enforce its resolutions. United Nations military. I agree. I think the military that the United Nations, the peacekeeping forces, I agree with. The other stuff I disagree with. A constant state of war benefits a country. Disagree. It doesn't necessarily benefit you, and it doesn't necessarily hurt you. It depends on the situation. Border protection is important. Agree. Tradition just hinders the progress of technology. I'll agree. I don't think just technology, socially as well. There is no need for a national government. I disagree. There is some need. The national government does perform some good functions. It helps, with disputes between, states and stuff. The government has no business looking into most people's personal lives. Strongly agree. Most bad things happening in the world are caused by us turning away from religion. Strongly disagree. Immigrants can never really adapt to our way of life. Strongly disagree. Lasting peace leads to prosperity. Strongly agree. Oh, wait. Agree. Not necessarily. Lasting peace might not necessarily lead to prosperity. It might lead to a tension-filled place where people pretty much stay in power, where dictators tend to stay in power and still rule over the people ruthlessly, but, like it's kind of in a standstill. It's like a pause. So yeah, direct democracy is the best form of government. Disagree. There's benefits and drawbacks to direct democracy versus representative democracy. In some instances, direct democracy is favorable, in others, representative democracy is better. So it's you want to kind of have a mix. Society could not function without leaders and followers. To some extent, that's true. I would agree with that to some extent, though limitedly. Whistleblowers should be strongly protected. Strongly agree. The stronger the leadership, the better. Agree. Everybody should speak at least 2 languages. Strongly agree. The national government needs more power. Strongly disagree. Taxes should be increased on the rich to provide for the poor. Strongly agree. The United Nations needs more power. Agree. Faith is complete nonsense. Strongly agree. Peace is preferable to war whenever possible. Strongly agree. If AI could rule more efficiently than humans, then AI should rule. Strongly disagree. The wealthy have far more than they need. Agree. The government should monitor all citizens to combat terrorism. Strongly disagree. Diplomatic options should always be tried before war is even considered. Strongly agree. Let's see. My results, I am a moderate federalist. I would definitely agree. I am more of a federal kind of person. Moderate democratic. Yeah. Because I generally think that to some extent, to the extent that, because I do think there are some instances where we need to balance interests in democratic societies. So to that extent, that's where authority would be needed. But definitely, yeah, that's freedom. I definitely think more globalistically than nationalist. Moderate pacifist, I agree. I'm not a complete pacifist. I am generally militaristic. Freedom, very much freedom. Minimal security. Equality, moderate equality, decent amount of markets. Extreme secular. Yes, I am. I am extremely secular. Progress. Yeah, I agree. I am pretty centrist, I guess, on progress versus tradition. Um, Assimilationist. I do agree to some degree of assimilation, but am very much more of a multiculturalist. Yeah. So yeah, let me check back. Yeah, those are my results. So I think that is a much more accurate view, but even then, I do think it is a bit flawed because I do support a lot of more democratic institutions, mostly through that. But I am also concerned about, you know, a tyrannical majority, and that's where a tyrannical majority would come in. I do think there needs to be authority to say no. We live in a society of laws. You have to respect this minority's rights. They should be able to, even though, yes, we agree with you guys, but these people have their rights to practice their religion peacefully, and so on. So yeah, that's generally the authority part. And I do think it is fairly accurate, but again, in terms of where it aligns you. But I do think to get even more accurate, certain questions that they ask need to be more context based, you know. So, yeah. Um, they need to provide a bit more context, especially like my group's goals, like which group? Like racial group, ethnic group, uh, political group, religious group, which group, you know? It's some questions like that were a bit vague and not very specific because I think the specifics um, generally reflect better than the, you know, than the what is it? Than the general vaguish sort of stuff. So yeah, but I definitely feel like this was fairly accurate. So yeah, bye for now.